7:41. Is going to be information item 2015-16 budget. JB.
Thank you. So this is the first read of the budget, the adopted budget. It is a snapshot in time. It is probably the not aggressive budget, but it's the best case scenario for the district at this time, given the May revise scenarios that were announced by the governor last month. So let's just get started. General fund expenses. This is the total general fund, $44 million. 83% of that number goes towards salaries and benefits of all employees. That equates to about $36.6 million. So multi-year projections. This is the best 3-year projection that the district has had in several years. If we could just start by focusing on the third year out, 2017-18, we're only deficit spending just under $200,000 in this year. This means that after all the increases to our salary schedules for the next 2 years, I'll talk about that in a second, and the assumed rising costs of everything else, the state, by virtue of the local control funding formula, LCFF, is providing the funding necessary to do so. So at this point, it would require our property taxes to have growth rates of at least 8, 17, and 13% in the next 3 years to keep pace with LCFF. And yeah, we haven't seen those kind of numbers in a long time. So overall, for the next 3 years, we're just over $1 million better in, I guess you can call it deficit projections over the next 3 years from second interim. So that means, well, I'll keep going because it really has to do with I'll just get back to it. So the projected deficits have changed since the second interim, like I've said. There are 3 main factors to this change. We've mostly agreed to all units receiving a 2.75% salary schedule increase for both 2015-16 next year and the year after, 2016-17. The increase in the LCFF gap funding percentage was increased to 53.08% next year, 15-16, 37.4 and 36.7 in the following years, respectively, by the Department of Finance. These are building this budget based on those numbers, which is the highest that any one of the consultants see, Department of Finance, School Services, whoever. I think we are able to make those assumptions in this budget at this time because of our reserves. I'll go over that more in a minute. And the governor's budget May revision included a $601 per ADA or $2.3 million of one-time funding in 15-16, which is an increase of $1.6 million from the second interim. The governor's May revision significantly increases funding to education in 15-16 and continues to demonstrate its commitment to funding the LCFF. When combined with the 2013-14 and 14-15 LCFF funding, implementation progress would close about almost 70% of the gap in just 3 years. So we're talking about 100% funding in 2021 which was a 7-year implementation plan, and after 3 years, we're 70% of the way there. It's pretty good. The cap for funding percentage increases mean an additional $700,000 in revenue from the state in 2015-16 and $1.7 million in 2016-17 since my last update to you in March. So here are some of the assumptions for the multi-year projection. This is a general 1.5 step and column salary increase that I assume every year. 10% medical benefit increase, which actually starts in January, but that is when, and that's normal. Utilities and services, as I said earlier, the 2.75% salary schedule increase for all units in the next 2 years. I always just throw this in there, but property tax growth assumptions are 5, 3, and 3 for the next 3 years, which will become, as we move into LCFF, more cash now than later.
Isn't it just an FYI? I mean,
Yeah, it's an FYI,
533, because it's
yeah.
not, before we used to kind of, that would be a
We would
huge-
rely on it, definitely.
Yeah, but now, it's more of an FYI.
As I said again earlier, the $601 per ADA, which is one-time money, will be coming, will be received in 2015-16. Gap percentages again. LCFF calculator projects the district will be LCFF funded. That's big news. And this I've said already a couple times this year, but the temporary flexibility expires this year, June 30th, 2015, for routine restricted maintenance, which we were only making just over a 1% contribution to. That will need to increase back up to 3%, which is assumed in this budget, starting next year. And the suspension of instructional materials adoptions expires at the end of 2014-15 as well. Yeah. So I wanted to add this graphic again to show that moving out of basic aid is not a bad thing for this district. As you can see, the points meet in 2015-16 at just under $8,500 per student, and as we move into LCFF in the years going forward, we're just going to see that per student amount increase until we get to 100% funding in 2021. So I hope that's clear that moving out of basic aid in this case is not a bad thing for us.
What happens after 2021?
Oh, it's just, we're moving, nothing, just,
Well, that's when
we
you
should
need
see, even higher per ADA amounts in 2021, and that's what we're moving towards, and it's several $1 million more to our budget at full implementation, but.
Great.
Yeah,
It's a good thing.
yeah, very good.
Isn't 2021 that's when the state decided that they're going to be fully funding at this LCFF formula? So
Yes.
we're not picking 2021.
No,
That's a state.
Yeah, it's designated by the state. That's probably why you use that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
all right, so I made a point earlier to say that we are $1 million better than what we were projected. So we have this $2.5 million that we were going to spread out over 3 years to get us through those 3 years. Now we're at the end of the third year of this budget, we will still have $1.5 million left in the general fund reserve that we had planned to use to get us through 3 years. I mean, it's a good problem because the state is starting to give, like I said earlier, what we deserve or what we're entitled to money-wise per student. And we prepared ourselves to get us to this point, and the numbers just keep getting better. So that is just our unrestricted general fund. So we'll have some money to work with. I still want to say that these are projections, and I don't really know what's going to happen in the third year. Having a reserve is still a good thing. I hope we continue to have them. Yeah. So Fund 17 is our reserves for is our a reserve on top of our 3%, or it contains our 3% reserve, and then this is the same slide you've seen many times, but the parens just shows where the money came from. So the 3% is required. The tax reserve we held in case our taxes didn't come in. I'd still like to keep that around because we're still on the bubble, and who knows what'll happen. But we're most likely in LCFF. Deferred maintenance and adult ed, those balances are where the money came from when we were allowed to from Tier 3 transfer this money from those funds into our special reserves. So we'll always have deferred maintenance projects that we can use this money for if that's what we decided to do. So you're not adopting the budget today, but it is my recommendation that you do so next time. The district's able to meet its financial obligations in the budget year and 2 subsequent years, and all our cash balances and reserves are adequate. Any questions?
Yes.
Gary?
Rick,
Berta?
start.
I do, yeah. So, just for clarity, if there is anybody watching that's not in the room, so that from a contextual standpoint, so that if someone sees the projected deficit spending, the assumption isn't that that's irresponsible deficit spending. Can you fill, the void for the general public to understand why we would deficit spend at $1 million?
Yeah. Again, I was trying to make the point earlier that this is definitely the best 3-year. If I had the second interim projection up here, we would see all negatives and all past the $500,000 mark for every year. So revenues have changed. They're putting more money into LCFF. This was always a planned deficit spending proposal. We've had deficit spending for several years in a row now, and this was a planned deficit spend. This is actually lower than it was at second interim, and overall, like I said, it's $1 million better over the next 3 years than what we expected just a couple months ago.
So just for clarity, are you saying that with the LCFF projections, the money coming from the state, that the deficit spending, it is actually because we've been hanging on to these reserves for quite some time, not knowing how things are going to go with the state, and now that the state is, making good on the projections and the promises, and it's coming in, that we're actually spending down some of our reserves to fill the gap in the event that they couldn't. Is that sort of what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, that was the plan all along, was to get us to the point where they were going to fund LCFF to the point that it was going to be good for us. It was either going to be our taxes were going to skyrocket, or LCFF was going to come into play, which is what it looks like it's going to do over the next 2, 3 years, 4 years. And like I said earlier, it's so important. Like, what makes me so excited about this budget is that the third year out, after all the increase in expenses, mostly due to the increases that we're giving to our employees, is that we're going to be very close to net zero. I mean, yeah, I can con Carla out of $178,000, I think, to make that at zero. But that makes me so happy, because in 3 years from now, all it takes is LCFF funding to be able to have a balanced budget.
A few small things. So the state is going to send money for textbooks? When you said that the textbook quashing is going to end, does that mean they send us money?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
All
They're going to make us
the
buy
funding
new-
for instructional materials was incorporated into the formula. Tier 3, I forget what it's called, Tier 3.
Right.
Do you remember?
But we were able to,
Yeah.
they gave us permission not to spend money on that because
Correct.
we were out of money.
Yeah.
It wasn't because we were out of money, was it?
Oh, yeah, it was a result of the budget cuts that the state was making. They rolled all
Budget
those.
cuts, is what I meant.
Yeah.
Oh, not us personally.
Correct, no.
What are services on that original graph, 13% services?
That encompasses so many things. For example, services include all our utilities, consultants, a lot of special ed.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Special ed is in
Special
there.
ed's a big.
Oh, that explains it. Thank you.
Okay.
So just as I always do, 83% goes to salaries and bennies, and then special ed. It's not that we have 17% to spend as we like. Another big chunk goes to special ed. So really, we don't have a lot of discretionary money. I mean, it's a point I make every time, but it's true. You know, it's like we're that family that is almost paycheck to, well, we are. We're paycheck to paycheck. And then 1.5 step and column. I make this point every time, too, that we don't call it raise, but it is additional pay for our employees. And so in this budget, that is in one of your data points, is that it also includes an annual 1.5% step and column increase.
Correct.
And I just like to keep reminding myself of that it is more money, which is what we're trying to always accomplish, is we're trying to pay more, because we know that especially teachers need to be paid more. And the state today is flush. And when I listen, it's because employment is up, and money is flowing, and therefore the state is flush. But we are in California dependent on, in boom times we're flush, and in bad times we go bust. And so as a board, we just always need to remember that all it takes is one bit of bad news. And the way the state would like to even that out is a sales tax. I mean, I'm just saying that is a discussion in Sacramento, is how to make this up and down thing more level, and they're trying to do that. Right now, we're flush, and that's what scares me, because it doesn't stay flush. Anyway, but I'm glad that it's good news.
Dan?
You know, we talk about deficits, and here we're a little bit below the line, but we've been the, was it the grasshopper and the ant? We've been the ant. We put away money. We've been extremely frugal, to the point of doing things that we hated doing. There was a good 5 years of cutting, just constant cutting. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you cut, and then you come right back and you have to cut more, and you say, where? And people say, well, look at all these reserves you have. Why isn't that money in play? When you look at 3%, if you imagine your salary for the year and say, okay, we're going to put 3% aside for disaster, and, you know, it would be foolhardy. 3% is not going to cut it. And I just have to compliment John. You've been part of this, if not leading it, for a long time. We've been through so many years of just total scarcity, and it has been managed extremely well. And we've counted on spending off into the future, into deficits, and handling it. We've gotten used to deficits as a way of life. And all that means is that we had put enough money away, that we could afford to subsidize ourselves from that and get through a very difficult time, arguably the worst time since the Great Depression. And so now we're coming up on a little rise after that, but I think that I think those lessons stick. My father was a Depression kid until he was 83 years old. And so to Gary's concern that we not forget, I don't think we will. That was kind of a bad time, but I'm very proud of the way it was handled, and a lot of that goes to your department and to you. So thank you.
Any additional questions? Negative. We don't, this is just information items today, right? Yes, so we'll move on.